royal brothers. One unexpected broadcast. When Prince Andrew and Prince Edward stepped forward to speak about the future of the royal family, no one was prepared for the emotion, the regret, and the truth. What they revealed shook the monarchy and left the nation absolutely heartbroken. This changes everything. The morning London held its breath. It was just past 7 a.m. on a chilly Thursday morning when something unspoken swept through London. Not sirens, not breaking news, just stillness. A kind of silence that made people stop and look up from their phones, from their cups of tea, from their usual lives. Above the Mall, a thin winter fog rolled in, veiling Buckingham Palace in soft grey. Streetlights flickered against it like ghostly lanterns. Even pigeons on the palace gates seemed to pause. There was no sound, but the slow breath of a city sensing that something big was about to unfold. Suddenly, the calm was interrupted by a flurry of coded phrases from usually composed royal reporters. "We are expecting an unscheduled update from the palace. This was not on the calendar. Brace yourselves. This one feels different." At first, no one could understand it, but within minutes, whispers turned to quiet chaos. In Westminster, florists stood still by their morning deliveries. Along Hyde Park, taxi drivers paused their radios. In tiny cafes near Kensington, baristas exchanged worried glances. Everyone was asking the same thing. What's going on at the palace? Then came the name no one expected, Prince Edward. He was never the headline, never the drama. The youngest son of Queen Elizabeth II, Edward had always been known as the quiet royal, the one who kept his head down and his service steady. And yet, on this cold morning, his name was at the center of a growing mystery. Inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere had changed. Curtains were drawn shut. Phones that usually rang non-stop had gone silent. Staff moved briskly, but without chatter. Guards stood a little stiffer. Every corner of the palace felt frozen in time. There were no official briefings, no prepared camera setups, no rehearsed statements. By 9:30 a.m., multiple royal sources confirmed it. Prince Edward had called for a private media briefing. No video, no press conference, or public appearance. Just a statement. Short, direct, emotional. And the question gripping everyone now was, it's like the walls were holding their breath, a palace maid would later recall. Even the chandeliers looked like they were listening. Edward had always been the steady one, the quiet brother, the one who stood behind the curtain and held it steady, not the one to pull it back. "The weight of silence can be louder than words," whispered one senior aide, standing just outside the East Gallery that morning. Whatever was coming, it wasn't routine. It wasn't ceremonial. It was personal. And that eerie tension built up until evening, when the world, eyes wide and hearts braced, finally heard the words that would change everything. The broadcast no one expected. At 7:01 p.m. sharp, Buckingham Palace issued a short but thunderous message across every major news outlet. His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, will address the nation tonight. No context, no leaks, no advance notice. Even the Queen's Christmas broadcasts gave more warning than this. This wasn't royal tradition. It was a rupture. By 8 p.m., families across Manchester, Cardiff, and even as far as Aberdeen sat huddled near their TVs and phones. Something about the timing, the secrecy, and Edward's involvement made this feel different, more intimate, more painful. Inside the palace, chaos swirled. Advisors clutched briefing papers. Assistants whispered frantically. But Prince Edward stood alone, his face pale, his hands lightly shaking. The camera light flicked on, and that's when it all shifted. There was no royal script, no stiff protocol, just a man, facing decades of silence. "I have carried this for years," he began, eyes downcast. "And tonight, I no longer can." His voice trembled, not from nerves, but from memory. He didn't sound like a royal. He sounded like a son, a brother, a man. He spoke of burdens never shared, emotions never allowed, and expectations that crushed more than they shaped. "We are trained to uphold tradition," he continued. "But tradition must never erase the human being beneath the crown." As he spoke, social media exploded. Headlines formed in real time. Prince Edward's emotional confession. Unprecedented honesty from the palace. The quietest royal speaks loudest. But it was only just beginning. The next words he said pulled open a wound that had never healed, and finally revealed the regret that haunted him marred. "I have carried this for years." A prince begins to break. The moment Prince Edward lifted his eyes, everything changed. The room felt smaller, the silence heavier. This wasn't a prince delivering a formal message. This was a man finally opening a door he had kept locked for over 20 years. His voice softened as he said, "I have carried this for years, longer than anyone knows." The nation leaned in. Even the broadcasters paused their commentary. Something raw was coming. He spoke about a conversation with his father, Prince Philip, shortly before the Duke passed in 2021. Philip had once told him, "You steady the ship when others cannot." Edward lived by that line, shaping himself into the quiet support beam the family leaned on. But being the steady one came with a hidden cost. He became the one who never cried, never complained, never faltered. The one everyone overlooked because he never caused trouble. As Edward shared this memory, pain flickered across his face. A rare moment of vulnerability from a man trained to suppress it. He described the invisible split between the man he was inside and the role he was expected to play outside. "There is a moment," he said, "when the crown asks you to silence your heart, and sometimes you obey." His words shook the room. It wasn't rebellion, it was revelation. He hinted at something deeper, an old regret he had carried since his mid-30s, something he had never forgiven himself for. Social media timelines filled instantly. What is he talking about? What did Edward hide all these years? The emotional tone of his voice suggested this was no minor mistake. It was something that had shaped his entire adult life. "Duty kept me upright," he whispered. "But regret lived in the quiet moments when no one was watching." The nation held its breath again. Whatever this regret was, it wasn't political, it wasn't scandal, it was personal. And it was about to break him open in a way no royal had ever allowed themselves to be seen. This confession led directly into the truth he had run from for decades, one moment that changed the course of his life forever. The regret that haunted a lifetime. Edward finally revealed the moment that had followed him like a shadow since 1999. It was a private family gathering, small, important, deeply personal. A moment he knew he was supposed to be present for, but instead, he chose duty. He chose a scheduled engagement, believing that representing the crown mattered more than anything else. That choice left a mark he never escaped. He described how, when he finally returned to Windsor, The halls were quiet. No staff rushed around. No chatter in the corridors. Something was different. A palace maid, someone he had known since childhood, gave him a soft nod. Not sympathy, not blame, just a look that told him something painful had happened in his absence. And then he saw his mother. Queen Elizabeth II, graceful as ever, greeted him with warmth. But her eyes told another story, a quiet disappointment. Not anger, never anger, just a depth of sadness he never forgot. He understood in an instant. She needed her son that day, not a prince, and he hadn't been there. Edward's voice cracked as he admitted it. "I thought I was honoring duty," he said, "but I failed to honor her heart." For the first time, the world saw a prince acknowledge a mistake, not of scandal, but of absence. That silent moment with his mother followed him through 2 decades of public service. It shaped the way he worked, the way he walked, the way he tried to atone through perfection. "A title kept me away," he said painfully, "and I never forgave myself for that." He confessed that this guilt pushed him into years of flawless duty, hundreds of engagements, charity work, appearances, all attempts to balance a scale that only weighed down heavier with time. The ache never faded. The regret grew. And this was the moment, he admitted, that shaped the emotional truth he would reveal next. His story shifted now from regret to the moment everything inside him finally broke. The broken moment that changed everything. It was March 2003, and Prince Edward was walking through the long red-carpeted hallway of Buckingham Palace after returning from another overseas royal duty. The hallway was silent. Only the echo of his polished shoes filled the space. But what he carried was heavier than his footsteps, guilt that had lived in him for 4 years. He had just returned from a high-profile event representing the crown, but his heart wasn't in it. That day marked the anniversary of the moment he had missed, a deeply personal family moment that his mother had never brought up again. But he remembered every second of it. He replayed it endlessly. The day he put duty above family. He reached the grand drawing room where the Queen was waiting. Her smile, as always, was serene, regal, warm. But Edward saw something else that few would notice. Her eyes, gentle but distant. Not cold, just changed. And in that subtle silence between them, he knew she had already learned how to live without the son she needed that day. "That day split my world in two," Edward said during his emotional broadcast. "From then on, I wasn't just a prince. I was a man trying to fix something that couldn't be undone." For 2 decades, he tried to make it right. He became the most quietly consistent royal, never stepping out of line, never drawing attention, always present. But inside, he carried a fractured heart. The more perfectly he served, the more the wound reminded him that it wasn't enough. He admitted something few expected, that even in moments of success, royal weddings, engagements, overseas tours, he always thought of that one missed moment, the price of silence, the price of being the dependable one. "I realized too late," he said, "that she didn't need a prince that day. She needed her son." His words resonated far beyond the palace gates. They weren't about rebellion. They were about revelation. And the monarchy, so used to composure, now had to reckon with something it rarely allows: a broken heart, spoken aloud. The hidden cost of silence in royal life. Prince Edward's next words shook the foundations of royal tradition. He looked into the camera, voice steady now, but filled with meaning. Silence became my prison. For the first time in royal history, a senior royal didn't just acknowledge emotional pain, he admitted that the system itself buried it. The monarchy has always demanded composure, distance, and restraint. Royals are expected to keep smiling through loss, duty, and personal tragedy. But Edward exposed what that costs behind palace walls. We are trained to serve. We are never taught to grieve. He described years of numbness, where private sorrow was hidden behind charity events and state dinners. His honesty came like a storm. This wasn't a betrayal of the institution. It was a cry to save it from eating itself alive. He confessed to crying alone in palace rooms, to looking at family portraits and feeling like a stranger, and to pushing down his truth until it nearly swallowed him whole. The moment was raw, unscripted, real, and it changed how the public saw him forever. What once looked like calm was now understood as restraint. What once seemed like control was, in fact, silent suffering. The cost of silence, he said, is not just loneliness. It's losing yourself in the process. And yet, his confession was not about blame. It was about change, about evolution, about what the royal family must become if it hopes to survive the weight of its own expectations. Because what followed next would be the most unexpected turn yet, a decision no one saw coming. The decision that shook the monarchy. The world had barely caught its breath from Edward's emotional confession when the next words left the nation stunned. I am stepping back from royal duties indefinitely. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't scandal. It was something far more human, a man reaching his limit. For decades, Prince Edward had been the monarchy's most stable pillar, always present, always composed. But now, in front of millions, he said what no royal had ever dared to say in such a way. A fractured man cannot serve a united family. He made it clear, this was not about abandoning responsibility. It was about healing, about reclaiming the parts of himself that had been silenced for too long. Edward spoke with quiet strength. I still believe in service, but now I must serve my family and myself on my own terms. His words sent shockwaves through the monarchy. In over 70 years of royal broadcasts, no senior royal had ever publicly stepped back for emotional health. The gesture wasn't just rare, it was revolutionary. Pundits immediately drew comparisons. Was this like Harry and Meghan's exit? No, this wasn't exile. This was permission. A prince asking for space to grieve, to reflect, to finally be seen as a person, not just a public figure. I am not walking away from duty, Edward clarified. I am walking toward honesty. His decision sent palace courtiers scrambling. Headlines around the world exploded. Some praised him as brave. Others feared what this meant for the future. But one thing was certain. Prince Edward had changed the royal conversation forever. And just as the public began to process this seismic shift, King Charles III did something no one expected. The king's unexpected response. Behind the cameras, chaos erupted. Palace aides rushed through corridors. Advisors whispered frantically. Even seasoned royal commentators admitted there's no protocol for this. Then, just as speculation reached fever pitch, a short message from King Charles was delivered to the press. It wasn't read by a spokesperson. It wasn't filtered by tradition. It was handwritten, simple, powerful. receive his honesty with grace. The words silenced every newsroom in the UK. The king didn't condemn his brother. He didn't hide behind formality. He gave what the crown rarely gives: compassion. Insiders say Charles watched Edward's broadcast alone in Clarence House, reportedly moved to tears. For two men raised under the same silent regime, the message was more than royal. It was deeply personal. It was forgiveness. It was respect. For once, a palace source shared, the crown bent, and it didn't break. The king's statement marked a turning point. It wasn't just approval. It was a subtle admission that things must change. That vulnerability has a place beside tradition. That honesty, even when uncomfortable, has power. Edward's words had opened a wound. The king's response helped it begin to heal. And just like that, a new chapter began. Not just for Edward, but for the royal family. Because what happened next would reveal more than words ever could. The private reactions that said everything. As the palace lights dimmed that night, something happened that cameras couldn't fully capture, but witnesses would never forget. Staff lined the halls of Buckingham Palace, not out of protocol, but out of respect. These were people who had served the family for decades. From senior aides to kitchen porters, they watched Prince Edward pass through those historic corridors not as a royal, but as a man who had just bared his soul to the world. Some wept. Others simply nodded quietly. One longtime footman, known only as James, placed a hand on his chest as Edward walked by. That gesture said more than words ever could. Inside the palace, whispers floated from room to room. There was no judgment, only quiet understanding. For years, Edward had been the invisible strength behind the monarchy. Now, that invisible man had become something else entirely, a symbol of truth inside a world built on appearances. He walked like a man finally unburdened, said one staff member, not lighter, but freer. Even Queen Camilla, often shielded from personal matters, was said to have expressed admiration for Edward's courage. Princess Anne, known for her stoicism, reportedly sent him a personal note the next morning. Just 4 handwritten words. "You did it right." Outside the gates, the public's reaction was just as powerful. Crowds began to gather, leaving flowers. Not for a death, but for a life finally spoken aloud. On social media, hashtags like #EdwardSpeaks, #RoyalTruth, and #OurPrince2 began trending in over 15 countries. He wasn't the rebellious royal. He wasn't a scandal. He was the quiet one who finally said what so many needed to hear. And in doing so, he became something far greater in the eyes of the people. He became real. And now, with the world watching, the royal family stood on the edge of a shift they could no longer ignore. A new chapter in the royal family's story. That night, after the cameras were turned off and the palace had gone quiet, Prince Edward stepped onto the terrace overlooking St. James's Park. The cold night air wrapped around him like a second skin, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight. He looked up at the open sky, stars scattered above like reminders of something bigger, something freer. For decades, he had moved within walls of tradition, silence, and royal expectation. But now, standing alone beneath the moonlight, he felt it. Released, then, almost in a whisper, he repeated the words his mother had told him as a child. Words she rarely shared, but that had stayed buried in his heart. Truth spoken with courage is never betrayal. It echoed through the silence like a blessing. This moment wasn't just the end of a personal struggle. It marked the beginning of a shift. Edward's words, his vulnerability, his regret, his honesty, had cracked open a door that had long been bolted shut in the monarchy. A door that had hidden pain, grief, and emotional isolation for far too long. By saying what had never been said, that duty without emotion becomes a prison. He redefined what strength means inside the royal family. For centuries, strength had meant endurance, silence, composure. But Edward showed the world something new, that strength could look like tears, like confession, like stepping back to move forward. In the final line of his historic statement, he left the world with a warning and a hope. The monarchy must evolve, or break beneath its own silence. And with that, the old rules began to shift. In the days that followed, ripples turned into waves. Palace aides began holding private meetings to discuss new ways to support mental health within the royal household, a topic long considered taboo behind palace walls. Royal charities focused on emotional well-being, many of which Edward had supported quietly for years, saw a dramatic rise in donations. Thousands of letters poured into the palace. Some were from grieving sons, others from quiet daughters, but all carried the same message. Thank you for speaking the truth. Even foreign media, often quick to criticize, praised Edward's message. A French outlet called it a long overdue breath of human air inside a centuries-old institution. In Canada, Australia, and across Europe, commentators described the moment as a turning point for royal humanity, one that may have changed the course of history, not with scandal, but with sincerity. Unlike others who had stepped away before, Edward wasn't seeking press tours or publicity. He wasn't writing memoirs or launching global brands. He wasn't selling his story. He was simply reclaiming his voice, reclaiming his peace. He stepped back to be what the crown had once taken from him: a husband, a father, a brother, a man. And while the decision was his alone, the impact stretched far beyond him. It forced the royal family to look inward, to ask what kind of future it wanted, not just for the crown, but for the people behind it. The men, the women, the children, the humans. "He didn't break the crown," wrote one headline in bold black letters the next morning. "He gave it room to breathe." In that breath, something changed, not just within the palace walls, but in the hearts of millions who had watched a prince become fully human on the world stage. And now, as the royal family moves forward into ceremonies, duties, and the everyday mechanics of monarchy, they carry something new. Not just tradition, not just formality, but a memory of a night when silence was broken, when truth was spoken, and when, for the first time in a very long time, the royal family felt real. And the story continues, not colder, not weaker, but more human than ever before. Their words weren't just statements, they were warnings. Prince Edward's heartbreak, Prince Andrew's haunting silence. Together, they exposed the quiet cracks beneath the crown. The royal family can't go back now. The future has shifted. And for once, it's not about duty. It's about healing. This is just the beginning.